Good morning, children. Today we continue with the discussions on the novel If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. In the last class, we started with the summary. I gave you a summary. Today we will discuss the themes, characters, and we will have a critical analysis of this particular work. We'll start with themes and meanings. We understand that there are two related themes in this novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. One is the intimate relationship between reading and living, and the other, there is this tension between the reader's expectations and the writer's quest for distinction and originality. And here, reading and living become metaphors for each other. Here, there is some kind of observations, these kinds of observations, like the lives of individuals of the human race form a constant plot. These kind of observations made by the narrator are frequent in this novel. The lives of individuals of the human race form a constant plot. And also, we understand this book resembles life in many ways, particularly in its unpredictability. Both the book and life exhibit this unpredictable nature. The theme of life and reading leads Calvino to play continually with this conflict between the reader's demands and this author's quest for distinction and originality, all those authors' intentions. So, on one side, we see there is this expectation, demands of the reader, and the other side, we see the author's intentions or his journey towards distinction and originality. And here we understand that the reader always wants to completely immerse himself or herself in the narrative, as we see Ludmilla expressing this particular wish to immerse herself in the narrative, to submit oneself or to submit to being swept away into a satisfying conclusion. That is why, that is what all these readers wish, even us. When we read a novel or when we see a film, we want a satisfying conclusion. So, on one side, there is this expectations of the reader, and on the other side, we understand that there is this writer who counts on these ordinary expectations of the reader, who understand these ordinary expectations of the reader, but he completely defies all these expectations to a greater or lesser extent. He believes, the author believes, that to conform completely to the expectations of the reader would be like to create a dull, unimaginative, or imitative book. So the author tries to defy all these expectations, but he also understands that to defy all those expectations would create an unintelligible work, or he will be completely alienated. He understands that too. But here we understand Calvino takes a risk, not a kind of a minor risk of supplying an unexpected ending, but the heavier one of furnishing no ending at all. instead producing a series of beginnings that resembles neither life nor any of the usual forms of the fiction. And this novel comments throughout on these tensions between writer and reader. Calvino's narrator is lured by these possibilities of various counter narratives that suggest themselves. Furthermore, these readers have different expectations. Some of them, you understand that it is excruciatingly inapt to the writer. Some only want to escape from the world. So, that is actually an outright denial of the earlier thesis or the earlier idea of Calvino that life and reading are inseparable. And when the reader encounters the seven readers with different slants on their common interest, one, for example, reads each new book only until he is sure that it is not the one which he read in his childhood but has not been able to locate since. And another reader, we see that in order to go off on a tangent when he has succeeded and the book has served its purpose. Clearly, these are perverse readers, unwilling to receive the book as it is written. And this quest for unity, for the one complete book, is signaled in the first interpolated narrative in this work. And we see that there is this scene where the traveler in the train station will recognize his counterpart by a password. There is a scene of Alien. And this password is exchanged, but not the suitcases. And the narrative yields to a succession of similarly unfinished stories. And here we see the triumph of flux and disunion. And this quest for unity is always deferred. Now we move to the narrator. The narrator, who is unnamed and physically undescribed, he may be a single person or as many as 11 different writers, each the author of a separate novel, including the encompassing book supposedly written by Italo Calvino. And each of the novels is told by a person who might be probably, plausibly be called the narrator. The prime narrator is the author of the book that enfolds the other 10. And his main theme is the relationship between, as I said earlier, relationship between writers and readers. And he is an open and friendly fellow, addressing the reader or the another character directly and giving hints and directions as to how and why a perceptive reader reads. He points out all those novelistic tricks of the other writers, but we see that he himself uses these same devices, displaying and explaining them as the book progresses. So, in a sense, the narrator constructs the novel as the reader watches. While he constructs the novel, the narrator himself participates in the reactions of his reader. He is amused, baffled, confused, irritated, and intrigued by the devices that the other subsidiary authors use. And here we see that there is an inescapable air of illusion about the entire work. And the narrator, for all his honest appearance, is somewhat a sly and devious character. And within the novel, as you know, that there are 10 more novels and 10 more narrators. And it appears that all these narrators are variants of the narrator. If on a winter's night a traveler, so it is something like the first novel within a novel. If on a winter's night a traveler, so is as the same title as Calvino's book, and it later becomes confused in printing with another novel outside the town of Malbork. And it appears that this novel in turn has been mixed with another story leaning from the steep slope, and that appearance is an illusion, for the novel seems to be another one titled Without Fear of Wind or Vertigo. And at this point, the split narrator splits again, introducing Hermes Marana, a shadowy translator, and Marana seems to be a dark version of the narrator who practices plagiarism, deceit to produce the works that next appear, that is, looks down in the gathering shadow. And there is this another two confusingly titled works, like given by or penned by Flannery, Silas Flannery, in a network of lines that enlace and in a network of lines that intersect. And Flannery becomes yet another avatar of the narrator. He provides pages from his diary, which is another kind of book, and the narrator reveals that at least one of the Flannery books is almost certainly a translation by Marana of a Japanese work, which is titled On a Carpet of Leaves Illuminated by the Moon. Once more, this novel gives way to yet another one, Around an Empty Grave, and it in turn fades into the penultimate novel of the entire series. What story down there awaits its end? Only then does the narrator return and bring the enfolding novel to its close. So, throughout this novel, the narrator has been a kind of a guide of the reader, sometimes a kind of a wise host, sometimes he acts like a sly and teasing jester, a joker, and the narrator embodies all the key aspects of the authorship, that is, its talent to entertain and its ability to mystify. So that's about the narrator. And then we see the reader. The reader is a sort of everyman, a person of indeterminate age. Although we understand he is a clearly an adult male who is unmarried and whose expectations of life seem to have been reduced to a careful minimum, to a minimum. And as the story progresses, the reader learns to raise his standards and his hopes, expecting to expect and find greater enjoyment both in his reading and in his life. And beyond these obvious attributes, the reader is left outwardly a generally shadowy and a kind of an elusive figure. And Calvino is careful not to limit the character by giving out extensive description of his physical appearance or personal history. Instead, he allows the reader to develop in a fashion determined by the individual, that is, the actual reader. The parallel developments in this book are all those readers' growing fascination with these unfinished novels he confronts at different point of time. And there is this other reader, or Ludmilla, who joins him on this adventure. This personal relationship develops so that by chapter 7 we understand that these two have become lovers, and by the end of the book they get married. The reader becomes a more active and adventurous individual as time goes by, running after all those greater risks in pursuit of all those elusive books. So, this journey begins innocently in a bookstore and gradually escalates until the reader becomes or reader acts like a double agent. As the narrator becomes, in a sense, the author of each of these succeeding novels, the reader starts identifying himself with the main hero in each of these books. And in the end, it becomes difficult to tell where the original reader ends and his shadowy selves begin. So that's about the reader. Now comes the other reader. So the other reader is Ludmilla, who she is the reader's female counterpart, can be called his love interest, and finally becomes his wife. And like the reader, she is interested in books and in reading. Indeed, her love and appreciation of literature are deeper, more deep, and more instinctive than those of the reader. She sees both writing and reading as natural acts, and her ideal of an author is the one who produces books as pumpkin wine produces pumpkins. The physical attributes of the other reader are more clearly defined than those of the reader, in large part because she is described not only by the narrator but also through the perceptions and desires of the reader. And both agree that Ludmilla is an extremely attractive and highly intelligent young woman. And as first seen, she is first seen in the bookstore, and there she is presented as striking, beautiful, and with large, expressive eyes, flawless skin, and with richly waved hair. And her apartment is also described in greater detail than the woman herself, which actually reveals her mental and emotional nature. She is practical yet romantic. Her kitchen has a variety of appliances, but her refrigerator holds only an egg, half a lemon, and a few jars. And in her apartment, we see that on one wall there are number of framed photographs, and in the entire narrative, Ludmilla looks more believable and a realistic person. Throughout the novel, she remains relatively consistent in her reaction to the succeeding novels that appear and breaking off at their most interesting points. This Ludmilla readily accepts each new works as she finds it, while the reader gets disappointed, gets frustrated, and her interest is less in the plots of characters than in the very presence of the written word. And because of this devotion to the word, Ludmilla appears at times retiring and even shy. But she is friendly with all those variety of odd and intriguing characters. And in the end, we see that the reader is the most notable of these characters, and his dominant trait is that he comes closest to matching Ludmilla's passionate devotion. Now we have Loteria. Loteria is the antithesis of her sister Ludmilla. In her own way, she is attractive, but in an odd and not quite appealing way. With there is her appearance looks like she has a long neck, a bird's face, and a mass of curly hair. Her voice is harsher and sharper than her sister's and carries an ironic edge. So Loteria is intelligent, highly educated, relentless, and humorless. She seeks to reduce reading and literature to a precise, something like an objective science from which the human elements can be completely removed. As all in all these matters, Loteria is literal in her quest. Her highest ambition is to perfect a machine that will make it unnecessary for a person actually to read any novel. Instead, she believes that all those mathematical formulas and electronic computations will reduce the meaning of any given book to a set of numbers. So, we too have a similar idea. If you have a book in front of you, you have this strange idea of reducing it to a set of numbers, and that will give out the meaning of that book. How simple is that? So, Loteria is similar, has similar ideas. So, Loteria's approach to literature is purely theoretical. Instead of reacting to a book as either pleasurable or not, or even as good or bad, she must place it in a very rigid scheme. There, in all those discussion groups that dissect one of these novels, We see that the jargons flows so freely and it tries to obscure all the traces of the actual story. So, this is the approach to literature that Lotharia demands, and that is the opposite of the unforced natural acceptance of her sister. So, that is why it says that Lotharia is the antithesis of her sister, completely opposite to what Ludmilla believes. We don't see that passionate devotion of Ludmilla in Lotharia. So these are the characters in the novel. We started with narrator. There are different narrators. There is this reader and the other reader, that is Ludmilla, and there is this Lotharia. So these are the characters in the novel. I am stopping my lecture. In the next class, we'll start with critical analysis. I repeat, please read the novel and acquaint yourself with the plot and the characters. As I said earlier, it is a little confusing, a complicated one. So please familiarize yourself with the novel. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.